There are wounds that need no knife, no blood, to kill you while you're still alive. There are invisible wounds, leaving no scars on the body, but haunting the heart like shadows. And among them, few are as cruel as the wounds of rejection and abandonment. These are not ordinary wounds. They are emotional memories buried so deep in the unconscious that we can live an entire lifetime without realizing we still bleed from them. Wounds born in the cradle of childhood, when we were fragile, defenseless, and needed someone to hold us so we could believe the world was safe. But when that embrace never came, when the voice that should have soothed us went silent, when the presence that should have nurtured us disappeared, the child inside us learned, without words, to believe a cruel sentence: "I am not worthy of love." Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, taught us that the unconscious keeps what the conscious mind cannot bear. What is unbearable for the child, the psyche represses. But repression does not mean forgetting. It only means locking it in the basement of the soul, where time does not exist. The wound of rejection and abandonment is always there. In the adult body, it does not appear as a clear memory. It appears as symptoms: anxiety, fear of loss, desperate need for approval, inability to trust. It is as if the psyche whispers, "If I cannot hold on to someone, I will be thrown back into the void." That is why so many adults stay in relationships not for love, but out of sheer panic of being alone. This is why some tolerate abuse, betrayal, disrespect, simply to avoid reliving the echo of that original abandonment. Picture a small child waiting for their parents' gaze. That gaze is more than affection. It is the first form of identity. It is in the gaze of the other that the child learns, "I exist." Now, imagine that same child staring into emptiness, waiting for an embrace that never came, waiting for arms that remained cold. That scene carved into the shadows of memory shapes an entire existence. The adult born from such a childhood carries an echo of emptiness inside their chest. And this emptiness follows them in every encounter, in every attempt to love, in every embrace that never feels enough. That is why so many live as emotional beggars. They beg for love. They plead for attention. They settle for so little. Not because they are weak, but because they are fighting a ghost, the ghost of the rejected child. Psychoanalysis shows us that the unconscious speaks through acts, repetitions, and choices. And when we look at the wound of rejection and abandonment, we see silent patterns repeating themselves. A woman meets someone, and within days she believes she has found the love of her life. He seeks intense relationships, but when someone finally embraces him, he runs. Affection frightens him more than absence, because for him, love is nothing but a promise of future abandonment. So, before it can happen, he destroys the present. In groups, at work, even in friendships, he always feels like an outsider. No matter how much he is accepted, there is always a void convincing him that he doesn't belong. This is the echo of childhood, not being seen, not being recognized, not being validated. These are not character flaws. They are emotional scars, souls trying to survive what they have lived through. In adult life, the wound of rejection reveals itself most clearly in intimate relationships, because it is in love that the inner child screams the loudest. excessive neediness. When a partner does not respond quickly, an irrational panic arises. Pathological jealousy. It is not the fear of losing the other, but the fear of reliving abandonment. Difficulty trusting. Even in stable relationships, the person always waits for betrayal. Deep down, it is not the partner who is being tested. It is life, the psyche, destiny itself. As if the soul were whispering, "This time, will someone stay?" Freud spoke of primary narcissism, that state in which the infant believes they are the center of the world. When the infant cries and no one comes, when they reach out and find nothing, that narcissism is shattered, and that wound is devastating. It is not only the absence of affection, it is about witnessing the denial of one's very existence. It is about feeling that the world does not answer to your cry. That is why the rejected adult does not simply seek love. They seek the impossible, to rewrite the original scene, to erase the silence that killed them inside. Nietzsche once said, "He who stares into the abyss must be prepared, for the abyss stares back." The wound of rejection is that abyss. And when we dare to face it, we discover not only pain, but also the possibility of rebirth. Because every void is also an invitation to create. Every silence, a blank canvas. The problem is, few dare to face this abyss without masks. It is easier to distract oneself, to run from relationship to relationship, than to sit in silence and listen to the weeping child still living within. In the dark language of psychoanalysis, the body becomes the stage for what the soul cannot say. Those carrying the wounds of rejection and abandonment often bear invisible marks in their bodies. Constant migraines, breathlessness with no medical cause, a weight on the chest as if always on the verge of tears. They are symptoms of what Freud called the castration anxiety, the terror of losing what secures one's very existence. And in this case, what was lost was the primordial love. Many, in order not to suffer, create a mask, the mask of indifference. They tell themselves they don't need love, that the world does not matter, that they are self-sufficient. But that mask does not erase the wound. It only buries it deeper. And the deeper it is buried, the louder the unconscious brings it back, in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in destructive choices. Because there is no forgetting, there is only silence, and silence is always louder than the scream. There are words that cut open ancient wounds like blades. You're not enough. I don't need you. I don't want you here. For those who carry the wound of rejection, these are not just words. They are earthquakes. They are echoes of a childhood where the same pain was already felt, even if it was never spoken. This is why a small fight can become a complete emotional collapse. It is never about the present. It is about the past that has never healed. Healing through psychoanalysis is neither fast nor simple. It is not a magical formula, but a slow descent into the depths. To remember, allow painful memories to surface through analysis, dreams, free associations. To repeat, observe the patterns life insists on replaying. Who do you choose? What do you tolerate? Where do you sabotage yourself? To work through, transform these repetitions into understanding, accept the wound, but refuse to let it dictate every step of your life. Working through is like lighting a candle in the basement of the soul. The darkness does not vanish, but it is revealed. and revealed, it no longer terrifies as much. We might say that the healing of rejection is learning to become your own embrace. It is like traveling back in time to hold yourself in the cradle. It is like gazing into your own eyes and whispering, "I see you. I will not abandon you." This is the missing scene. Not the scene with your parents, not the scene with your lovers, but the scene with yourself. The moment you decide to become the presence you never had. To be abandoned is to experience a kind of symbolic death. It is as if the world whispered, "You are not necessary." And for a child, that is unbearable. That is why the wounded adult spends a lifetime fighting this ghost. Often they prefer to die slowly in toxic relationships than to face the original solitude. But there is a dark and liberating truth. The one who crosses the desert of loneliness discovers they do not die. They discover they exist even without being chosen. And in that instant, the wound begins to turn into a scar. You who listen now may recognize something in your own story. Perhaps you loved too much, only to be left behind. Perhaps you trusted too deeply, only to be betrayed. Perhaps you still carry in your chest the cold absence that never explained why it left. But listen carefully. You are not the abandonment you endured. You are not the rejection you received. You are the survivor of it all. You are living proof that even without arms to hold you, even without a voice to hear you, even without eyes to see you, you remained. Every pain, when understood, ceases to be mere suffering and becomes a teacher. The wound of rejection and abandonment, when illuminated, reveals one of the greatest lessons of existence. No one owns your dignity but yourself. As long as we wait for others to rescue us, we remain prisoners of childhood. We wait for the partner to heal us. We wait for the friend to complete us. We wait for someone, finally, to look at us the way we always longed to be seen. But the dark truth is this: if we do not look at ourselves, every gaze in the world will be insufficient. In psychoanalytic practice, we see this every day. Patients arrive begging for answers, but slowly they realize what is missing is not an external answer. It is an internal reconnection. Rejection was not only an act, but a message engraved into the soul. You are not worthy of existing. Analysis, listening, elaboration, they serve to dismantle this message, to show that what was once absence does not define your being. That the fact someone did not love you does not mean you did not deserve love. It only means they did not know how to love. And that difference changes everything. From the lens of philosophy, the wound of rejection is paradoxically an invitation to freedom. Because when we walk through it, we discover we no longer need to live as prisoners of approval. Simone de Beauvoir once said, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." In the same way, we could say, one is not born rejected, but becomes so, and one can also stop being.
To stop being rejected does not mean erasing the story. It means refusing to let the story dictate the future. The woman who learned to be alone. After years of running from one relationship to another, she finally dared to face solitude. She discovered she did not die. She discovered she could laugh alone, cook for herself, love her own company. That day, rejection lost its power. the man who forgave his parents, not because they deserved it, but because he deserved to be free. He realized that carrying hatred was remaining chained to abandonment. By forgiving, he did not erase the pain, but he broke the chain. The inner child who was finally held. In therapy, a grown man wept like never before. He wept for the child who had no embrace. In that weeping, he finally became the arms he always needed. And from that moment, something changed forever. The wound of rejection and abandonment is like being burned alive by the fire of absence. But like the phoenix, we can rise again from the ashes. The difference is, rebirth does not erase the scars. The ashes remain as reminders of what once was. But it is precisely because we carry the marks that rebirth is magnificent. Because pain makes us more human. Because absence teaches us the value of presence. Because abandonment forces us to become a home for ourselves. In the end, healing is learning to love in a way that no longer depends on being chosen. It is loving yourself with the same intensity you always wished to be loved. When you become that source, something extraordinary happens. You no longer accept scraps. You no longer beg for crumbs. You no longer submit to disrespect. Because the child within you has finally been embraced. And when the child is healed, the adult blooms. Listen carefully to these words. You are not disposable. You are not replaceable. You are not invisible. You are necessary. You deserve love simply because you exist. These phrases, spoken repeatedly to yourself, work as antidote against the voice of abandonment. And little by little, they begin to rewrite the inner narrative. Make no mistake, healing is not full light. It is made of accepted shadows, honored tears, revisited memories. It is in the darkness that we learn to see more clearly. It is in the silence that we hear the voices we once silenced. In solitude, we discover we were never truly alone, because we were always with ourselves. This is the paradox of healing. To no longer be hostage to abandonment, one must embrace solitude. To no longer be slave to rejection, one must accept oneself even in fragments. Wounds are not enemies. They are maps. They show where we were broken, but also where we can rebuild. Rejection, when understood, becomes a source of compassion. Those who were rejected learn never to reject another so easily. Those who were abandoned learn to treasure presence as gold. Pain educates us. Absence teaches us. And what once seemed like a curse may one day become wisdom. You who hear this now may feel the weight of each phrase. You may see in your own history the signs of rejection, the traces of abandonment. You may carry scars no one else can see. But remember this. Scars are not proof of weakness. They are marks of survival. They are witnesses that you walked through fire, and you are still standing. The child who once wept for not being chosen can now finally be chosen by you. And that is the choice that changes everything. Close your eyes and imagine. You are standing before the child you once were. They look at you, afraid, waiting not to be rejected again. Now, take their hand, look into their eyes, and say, I will not abandon you. I am here. I have always been here, and I always will be.
In that moment, the cycle begins to break. The echo of emptiness grows silent, and what was once symbolic death transforms into rebirth. The wound of rejection and abandonment is one of the darkest in the human soul, but it is also one of the most transformative.
It forces us to descend into the abyss of non-belonging, only to discover that we belong to ourselves. It tears us away from the illusion that we must be chosen, only to reveal that we are already worthy. In the end, healing is not about erasing the pain. It is about learning to walk with it. It is about turning absence into presence, emptiness into creation, abandonment into freedom. Because if there is one thing that psychoanalysis, philosophy, and life itself teach us, it is this: no one can reject the one who has learned to embrace themselves. No one can abandon the one who has decided never again to leave themselves behind. In that moment, the cycle begins to break. It is not just an external event, but an internal movement, silent, inevitable, irreversible. Something that had been bound in invisible chains for years begins to tremble. The echo of emptiness falls silent. What once sounded like screams of abandonment, like whispers of rejection, now loses its grip. What was once symbolic death transforms into rebirth. The wound of rejection and abandonment is one of the darkest wounds of the soul. It doesn't just cut, it brands. It seeps into the bones, into memory, into the deepest ties we try to create. This wound whispers in the dark, "You are not worthy. You are not enough. You do not belong." And for years, we believe this whisper as if it were absolute truth. But there comes a moment when pain, instead of destroying us, begins to teach us. There comes a moment when the wound that once bled becomes the very portal of our liberation. Abandonment forces us to dive into the abyss of non-belonging. It throws us into the depths of silence, where no one comes to save us, no one to hold us, no one to confirm that we exist. And there, in the cold, in the void, we discover a brutal truth. We belong to ourselves. That is the shock that transforms. That is the moment we stop begging to be chosen and we learn to choose ourselves. Rejection tears away the illusion that we need to be chosen to exist. It forces us to face the reality that we were already worthy long before any external gaze, long before any approval. It shows us that love is not begged for. Love is recognized within and then poured outward. And when that realization pierces us, there is no turning back. The cycle of emotional dependence begins to dissolve. In the end, healing is not about erasing pain. That would only be another form of escape. Healing is learning to walk with it. It is understanding that pain does not need to be an enemy. It can be a guide. It is transforming absence into presence, emptiness into creation, and abandonment into freedom.
It is not about denying the shadow, but about transforming it into fuel for rebirth. Psychoanalysis teaches us that what we do not accept within ourselves manifests in our relationships. Philosophy reminds us that every loss can become a path toward wisdom, and life itself, in its brutal silence, insists on showing us that no one can reject the one who has learned to embrace themselves. No one can abandon the one who has decided never to leave themselves again. Once you understand this, the game changes. The chains that once bound you break, one by one. The eyes that once sought validation in others now find steadiness within. The need to be chosen dissolves because you have already chosen yourself. And this is the kind of freedom that no one can steal. But do not be deceived. This path is not easy. It is dark. It is lonely. It is haunted by ghosts of the past, by the voices of those who once told you that you were not enough. It is marked by relapses, by the temptation to return to the familiar ground of pain. But if you resist, If you keep walking, you will discover something that has always lived within you: your strength, your dignity, your presence. Rejection is not the end. It is an invitation to return home to yourself. Abandonment is not a sentence. It is the chance to build an inner sanctuary so solid that nothing external can destroy it. And when that sanctuary stands tall, you realize no one can take away what you have become. No one can touch the sacred ground of someone who has chosen to embrace themselves. The darkness that once was your prison now becomes your armor. The pain that once paralyzed you now becomes your strength. The emptiness that once devoured you now becomes fertile ground for creation. And the abandonment that once was your deepest wound now becomes the soil where you plant your freedom. Because life, psychoanalysis, and philosophy teach us this: true victory does not lie in being accepted by the world, but in accepting yourself in the silence of the world. In the end, no one can reject the one who has learned to embrace themselves. No one can abandon the one who has decided never again to walk away from themselves.
If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.